AI is supposed to get cheaper. That's how software works. You build once, and then you scale. But AI is doing the opposite. Training a single frontier model today can cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And that number is rising, not falling, so something doesn't add up. Because if AI is software, it should get cheaper over time, but it isn't. And that creates a much bigger question. What if AI doesn't scale like software at all? What if it scales like infrastructure? Because here's the part most people miss. AI is not just code, it's execution. Every time you train a model, you are running a physical process, thousands of GPUs, massive data centers, continuous energy consumption. And that has a consequence. You don't scale AI by copying it. You scale it by paying for it. And this is where the system flips. Because in software, scale reduces cost, but in AI, scale increases cost. And once that happens, the entire industry changes. Because if scale becomes expensive, not everyone can participate. The dominant narrative around AI is simple. It's a software revolution. Companies compete models and algorithms on data, and the assumption behind all of this is that AI will follow the same path as software, build better systems, scale them globally, reduce cost over time. That's what happened with the internet. That's what happened with cloud computing. That's what happened with SaaS. Write code once and deploy it everywhere. Cost goes down, adoption goes up, competition expands. But AI doesn't follow that pattern. Because AI is not just software. It depends on something else. Something physical. Compute, infrastructure. Energy. And the moment you depend on physical systems, the economics change. Because physical systems don't scale like code. They scale with cost. And this is where the illusion breaks. AI is not behaving like software. It's behaving like an industrial system. To understand why AI is getting more expensive, you have to stop thinking like a software engineer and start thinking like an industrial operator. Because training AI models is not replication, it's execution. Every time you train a model, you are not copying code. You are running a physical process. Thousands of GPUs. Massive data centers. Continuous energy consumption. And that changes the economics completely in software. You build once, and then you scale at near zero cost in an AI. You pay every time you scale. And this is where the system starts to diverge, because scale no longer reduces cost. It increases it. Let's break the system down. Training a modern AI model requires three things: compute, energy. Infrastructure, and altri modi parameters, modi compute, more juice, modi energy cost. This is the first causal chain, and it has no easy escape. Because you cannot compress compute indefinitely. You cannot eliminate energy consumption. And you cannot virtualize infrastructure. This is not a software constraint. It's a physical one. Now, at a second layer, scale itself is changing. Each new generation of models is not slightly bigger. It's massively bigger. More parameters. More data. More training steps. Which means the cost doesn't grow linearly. It grows exponentially. And this creates the second causal chain. A models exponentially more, compute exponentially here, cost fewer viable players. But here's where it gets worse. Because cost is not only about training once, it's about experimentation in software. You can test cheaply, you can iterate fast, you can fail without consequence. In AI, every experiment costs money. Real money, running a new architecture, testing new parameters, trying new data strategies. Each attempt requires compute, which means each attempt has a price. And that leads to a third causal chain.
Is showing a slight drift
Expensive
on the tertiary
experiments, fewer iterations,
and run
slower learning,
on the
competitive
before the next
disadvantage.
cycle.
And this is where the system starts to lock. Because learning itself becomes expensive. And if learning is expensive, only a few players can afford to improve. Now, let's make this concrete. Training frontier models today costs hundreds of millions of dollars, not thousands, not millions, hundreds of millions, and that number keeps rising because each new generation demands more compute than the previous one. So the system reinforces itself. Higher scale, higher cost, fewer players, more concentration. And this is where the system breaks from software completely. In software, competition expands the market. In AI, cost compresses it because every increase in capability raises the barrier to entry, and this creates a paradox. AI is advancing, but access to building AI is shrinking. Now, the consequences become unavoidable because when cost becomes the bottleneck, it doesn't just slow the system down, it reshapes who is allowed to participate. Start with the most visible effect. Who can actually train frontier AI models today? Not startups, not academic labs, not most companies, because training at the frontier requires hundreds of millions of dollars. And that is not a technical barrier, it's a financial one. So the system filters itself automatically. Only a handful of players remain. Big tech, well-funded AI labs, state-backed initiatives. Everyone else disappears from the frontier. Most companies are locked out. But this is only the first layer. Because exclusion is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of control. When fewer players can build, those players start to define the rules. They decide what gets built, how fast it evolves, who gets access. And this is where the power shift becomes visible. AI no longer behaves like an open market. It behaves like a gated system because access is no longer determined by ideas. It's determined by capital. This is the core mechanism. Cost, access, control. And once this loop starts, it reinforces itself. Because the players who can afford to train models are also the ones who improve them fastest. More compute, better models, more users, more revenue, more compute. This is not competition anymore. It's accumulation. And everyone outside that loop falls behind. Not because they lack ideas, but because they lack access to compute. And this creates a second layer of power. Because if you cannot build your own models, you are forced to depend on someone else's. So now the system splits into two groups: builders and users. Builders control the infrastructure, users consume it. Today, if you're a company building on AI, you're not training your own model, you're calling an API, and that API belongs to someone else. And that dependency is not neutral because the builders also control the interface, as cloud platforms, access pricing, usage limits, which means they don't just build the system, they govern it. They can set the price of intelligence, control who gets priority access, define how fast others can innovate. And this is where the market changes fundamentally, because it stops being a competitive landscape and becomes a capital-gated system. Scale is closing the market at this point. Scale is no longer a growth strategy. It's a survival requirement. If you cannot scale, you cannot compete. If you cannot compete, you become dependent. And dependency is where power consolidates. Now, look at where that power actually sits. Not in the model layer, not in the applications, but upstream in compute, in infrastructure, in the ability to execute at scale. Because that is the real constraint. And whoever controls the constraint controls the system. So this is no longer just about AI getting better. It's about AI becoming harder to build, and that changes everything. Because in a system where cost defines access, access defines power, and in that system, innovation does not spread. It concentrates, not around the best ideas, but around the players who can afford to execute them, because at scale, intelligence is not limited by knowledge, it's limited by cost. And when cost becomes the limit, it becomes the control point. So now the real question is no longer, who builds the best AI? The real question is, who can afford to build it? Because that is the constraint, not intelligence. Cost. And once cost becomes the bottleneck, it defines the market. If you control the cost, you control who can build. If you control who can build, you control the industry. Artificial intelligence looks like a digital revolution, but underneath, it is an industrial system. And in industrial systems, power concentrates, not where ideas are created, but where constraints exist. And in AI, that constraint is cost. Because cost defines access, access defines control, control defines power. So AI is not just getting better, it's becoming harder to build. And that means the future of AI will not be defined by intelligence, but by who can afford to create it. And this is the industry code.